Welcome to the Altogether Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries and followed their instincts and own paths, and now empower others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting altogether.show. And now your host, Eric Satz.
My guest on the show this week is Christine Bader. We met at Amherst College before she would eventually pursue a career in corporate responsibility. She's the author of Evolution of a Corporate Idealist, When Girl Meets Oil, which she wrote about her experience with BP working all over the globe. She would eventually move to Amazon in a corporate sustainability role before leaving to start the storytelling project, The Life I Want. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it.
This episode of The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Christine Bader, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric.
Love that smile.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's been a little while.
You haven't aged a bit, by the way.
Oh, you're too kind. You are way too kind. And you look very much the same to me. So this is really, really fun to do. For people who don't know, Bader, if you went to Amherst College, Chrissy, if you're a mother, Yale MBA. Out of Yale, you go to BP, which somehow kind of points you in a direction of social responsibility. You eventually go to Amazon as a director of social responsibility. Somehow you manage to write a book, Evolution of a Corporate Idealist, Girl Meets Oil. I love that title. I mean, that's incredible.
Thank you.
Scholar, lecturer, Atlantic contributor. All of these things are interesting. The life I want. It's okay to be sad. But when I ask you to tell us who you are, what comes to mind?
Wow. Thank you, Eric, for reeling through all that. What comes to mind right now? Well, we're still under lockdown. We should say here, right, mid-July. And so most of my waking hours right now are spent herding my 7.5-year-old twins and trying to keep everybody healthy and sane, which, as you know, with kids, even though yours are way older, is no small feat.
Thank God.
Yeah, so that's the main thing that I am right now. I think, though, also I am a writer at heart. That's part of why Amherst College was such a good place for me, because it's a writing school. And that's always, despite all these very different jobs, some of which you've listed, writing is how I think and how I process and how I synthesize ideas. And I think it's also how I serve. Like, one of my superpowers is to connect dots and take complex ideas and translate them into stories or into narratives that explain, illuminate, hopefully inspire.
Storytelling is such an amazing superpower, by the way. And I love that you use that word. Where does storytelling come into play with your twins right now?
Ooh. Well, I need to speak a little bit quietly because who knows when they will come in. But right now, I've got a pen pal correspondence going with my daughter, not as me, but as her imaginary fairy friend. So she built a birdhouse, but couldn't find a good spot in the tree for it. So she put it on the ground and declared it a fairy house. And she left a welcome note. And the last thing that I need is another quarantine parenting duty. But I thought, the poor kid's stuck at home with her twin brother, and how could I leave her hanging, right?
Oh my God, I love that. Mom of the year, no question. Or fairy of the year.
Right,
Both.
Exactly. Both. So we've got this really lovely correspondence going. And true to, a white liberal mom today, we have managed to bring up issues of racism and social justice. And but it's actually been really beautiful. And since I don't really have the time or the space or the capacity to write in public fora like I have done in the past, this has been a really nice way to exercise that superpower in towards an even better end, I might say. I'm hopefully will write something about it eventually, but
if there is not a children's book in this, I don't know what there is a children's book to be made out of. This is, I mean, I love this story. This is fantastic. So let's go back to your childhood for a second. Date and place of birth, please. I tend not to give out my birth date, not because of any modesty about being 48 years old, but because of identity theft. So let's just say the first quarter of 1972 in New York City. The 48 doesn't show, by the way. I'll just say it again for the record.
Thanks.
So not everybody grows up in New York City. A lot of people go to New York City sort of when they're trying not to grow up. But what is life like growing up in New York City?
Well, you know what you know. I didn't know any different. I didn't know it was weird. I didn't know it was weird until I got to Amherst, really. And people talked about playing in the street, right? And I was like, you'd play on Madison Avenue? Like how? Right? And I didn't realize that growing up in an apartment building, stacked on top of lots of other families, I didn't realize that was unusual. So I don't know. What was it like? It was like any other childhood. Like you get bored and try to figure out ways to get into trouble when you're in high school. And, but I will say, what I am most thankful for now is that it was an incredibly diverse place. And I realize how special and how unusual that is now that I'm living in Oregon. And it was a dynamic, exciting place full of, again, things that I took for granted then, full of culture and energy and vibrancy. And I loved the density and the food.
Oh, what's not to love about the food?
Yeah.
So how do you end up at Amherst?
How did I end up at Amherst? My father had gone to Yale. My uncle had gone to Yale. And I think I assumed that I was going to go there because, I don't know, maybe that's where you go to college. I don't know. Until I visited Amherst. I guess it was the fall of senior year, maybe, I don't know, maybe junior year. And I was like, ooh, I like this place. I was a tennis player in high school and not a particularly good one. So I wasn't going to be able to play at Yale. But I thought there was a shot of playing at Amherst. And I like the idea of being able to get involved in not just sports, but lots of other extracurricular activities too, which I ended up doing. So yeah, the idea of a small liberal arts college, and I mean, what's not to love when you visit Amherst, right?
Not a lot. Yeah, it's a pretty special place. I completely agree. So, what do you study at Amherst? What do you major in?
Rugby.
Rugby. So drinking.
Yeah, there was a lot of beer there. No, I majored in American Studies, which was perfect for me because it was the major for people who had a diverse range of interests.
And so what's between Amherst and Yale? What happens?
Yeah, so uh, when senior year was upon me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't go the corporate recruiting route. My parents were both in corporate jobs, but I didn't really understand what they did, and I wanted to do something where at least I could see that there is a direct impact on other people's lives. So I had a couple of friends from Amherst who had been involved with City Year, the AmeriCorps program. So I went and did that. So it's full-time community service. I served in their corps in Providence, Rhode Island. So working again with a really diverse team of fellow corps members, serving as a teacher's aide in a public elementary school in Providence. So that was a one-year program. And then I worked at Phillips Academy Andover at the prep school and was their first teaching fellow in community service. So they had a teaching fellows program where they would get people who were 1 or 2 or 3 years out of college to teach a lighter course load than full faculty, but also live in a dorm, coach a sport. I was their first teaching fellow in community service, which meant that I had all the same other responsibilities, but instead of teaching, I was helping run their very extensive community service program. So that was a one-year gig, and the boarding school life wasn't really for me. I was so impressed with the students that I met and the faculty. But then I had a friend from City Year who was back home in New York, and she was part of a government fellowship program called the New York City Urban Fellows Program. And that program recruits, again, people who are a couple years out of undergrad to spend a year working in a New York City government agency. So I went and did that and worked for the mayor's chief of staff in New York City. And this was under Giuliani's first term before he completely lost the plot. So that was a great experience for somebody who grew up in New York City.
Lost the plot is very kind, by the way.
Yeah. Yes. So it was fun then. And then, like every good liberal arts graduate, I started thinking, okay, maybe it's time for graduate school.
And so you end up at Yale. And so you've done AmeriCorps, you've done the community service responsibility thing at Andover. You're working for the mayor's office. You go to business school, and coming out, you go to BP, British Petroleum.
Yep.
How does that happen? What's the attraction?
Business school happened because in those jobs, I started to realize that the private sector was shaping a lot of the conditions that I was reacting to in these other jobs. So at City Year and at Andover, I was serving in communities that needed service because either the private sector had left and taken all the jobs with them. Like Andover was right down the road from Lawrence, Massachusetts, which used to be a bustling mill town, right? Before manufacturing got outsourced to Central America and to Asia. Or companies had moved in and failed to hire anybody from the communities where they were located, or did things that were much more insidious, right? Engaging in pollution or corruption. So it just got me thinking, like, who are these private sector people? Like, who are these business people, right? In New York City government, it was like companies had to be wooed for the jobs and for the tax revenue, but they also had to be regulated, right? And so I just wanted to learn about business. Like, I just wanted to understand how the world worked. So that's why I went to business school. And then I got there, and not dissimilar to senior year at Amherst, I was like, everybody's doing this corporate recruiting thing. I don't really understand what it is, but I guess I'm supposed to go do that. And then John Brown came to speak at Yale the first year of my MBA. And at the time, this was in the fall of 1998, He had become the first CEO of a major energy company to acknowledge that climate change was real and say that we had to do something about it. So I was really intrigued. I thought, this is a guy who is thinking about his role and his company's role in the world differently. So when the opportunity opened up to spend a summer in their headquarters in London, I thought that would be a really good fly on the wall experience. So that's what I went and did.
So you must have done a good job, because they invited you back and you end up there for like 8 years. And people can go Google Christine Bader and, Girl Meets Oil and see the TEDx. But I would love for the people who are listening to us right now understand your progression within BP and your time overseas and the effect it had on you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my summer internship, I was pleasantly surprised that I really enjoyed the people who I met there that lived all over the world. They'd done really different kinds of jobs, which was really appealing to me because you can start to see the theme emerging. My major in college, all these one-year fellowships, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So we agreed that I would come back to the company and we'd figure out later what and where. My mother is from the Philippines. I'm half Filipino. The thing we didn't mention just in the timeline is before business school, I had deferred so that I could spend some time in the Philippines. And so when I was thinking about what to do after business school, I was talking to my contacts at the company and thought, well, what do we have going on in Asia? So BP had just taken over Arco, the American oil company. And one of the primary reasons for that takeover was Arco's assets in Indonesia. So there was a lot of opportunity there. There was a lot to do. There was a lot to do for somebody with some brand new MBA skills. So I was talking to folks in the company there about the fact that not only was there a lot of commercial work to do, but it was a place with some really big social and environmental challenges. So I went there, this was in the fall of 2000, as a commercial analyst, because that's what you do out of business school. And back then there weren't really corporate social responsibility or CSR jobs. There was Ben and Jerry's, right? But it wasn't really a thing. It wasn't nearly as ubiquitous as it.
Well, ice cream is a thing, but
ice cream is a thing. But this notion of that is
CSR was not a thing.
Exactly.
Right. Yes.
So I went out there as a commercial analyst, crunching spreadsheets, right? And I did that for a while. And as I was looking at all the different assets that BP
in Indonesia,
in Jakarta. That's right,
yep.
In the capital. So as I was doing that and looking at all the different assets that BP had acquired and trying to figure out what should we keep, what should we sell, what should we do with all this stuff, there was one project in particular that was proving very interesting. And it was a really big gas field in West Papua, which is the eastern tip of Indonesia. It is the end of the earth. And from a technical and financial perspective, it was a great project. Again, it was one of the crown jewels of the Arco takeover. Big gas field, really close to the surface of the water, really easy to develop. And BP had built LNG, liquefied natural gas plants, all over the world before. So again, technically no big deal. But BP had never done this in a place like West Papua, which environmentally and socially is one of the most sensitive places on Earth. So, for example, the gas field was in a bay that was home to one of the world's largest intact mangrove forests. So, really sensitive environmentally. And it meant also that it was really swampy. So there weren't that many places where you could build a $2 billion industrial facility. So Arco had picked a site that was one of the few sites around the bay where there was solid land, slightly above the water level, protected on both sides by streams, which meant that it was one of the only spots in the area where it was feasible to live. So there was a village there of 147 families that the Indonesian government was like, okay, just move them. right?
Just move.
Just move them. So there was a resettlement that had not started yet. But, people have to move all the time for projects that a government deems of strategic importance, right? Like for the Second Avenue subway in New York, people have to move, right? But there's a process in place. People have to be consulted. People have to be informed of their options and ideally involved in co-creating those options, right? They have to be compensated if their livelihoods are impacted. And when we started looking at the resettlement process that had begun, none of these things had taken place, or at least they weren't documented. So anyway, more and more of these issues.
It was more of a just move.
Yeah, just move them. So yeah, I write about this in the book, that the first time I went to visit the site, it was like, okay, let's go see where, your new homes are going to be. And this is a fishing community, right? They're on the coast. So we start walking inland, and we're walking further and further inland, and the rainforest is getting denser and denser, and the guys are hacking through it with these machetes, and we get to this clearing. It's muddy, it's dark, there's no water access. And we look at these guys like, really? And they just shrugged. They're like, yeah. Right, because ARCO had told them however many years prior that they were going to move to this site, and then the BP takeover, everything got put on hold. And they were like, can we just move already? And then, I come in and I'm like, well, we have to protect your human rights. And they're like, what are you talking about? Can we just move? Right, so this was complicated. Okay. And again, in the fall of 2000, there wasn't an army of CSR professionals to deploy to this project. So I basically put my hand up and said, can I do that instead of doing the spreadsheets? And they were like, yeah, please, figure it out. So that's how I started getting involved in this kind of work.
So what is step one? I mean, figure it out. You're moving,
yeah.
I don't know, 120, 140, 150 families. Just move them. What is step one? Where do you start?
Yeah, I start by talking to people, because that's what I do, right? So I found the guy who wrote the World Bank's resettlement standards, and I called him on the phone. And so I started.
Hi, this is Bader.
Hi. Let me tell you what I got going on, right? And again, this is a guy who's been a World Bank expert for years. He literally wrote the book on resettlement. And I was talking about this project, and he was intrigued because he'd never really worked with a private sector company, right? He's usually engaged by the bank.
So that was actually my next question, which was his book theoretical, or was it pragmatic, or was there some combination of the two?
He wrote the World Bank's resettlement guidelines, which are, here are the steps you have to take for consultation, for assessing impact to livelihoods.
So was anybody using these?
The World Bank.
The World Bank
right?
was.
But,
okay.
Yeah, but companies, usually it's governments.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was talking about, and then I got to the number of families. And he said, wait, I'm sorry, did you say 127 or whatever it was? And I said, yeah. And he sort of chuckled, and he said, I just got back from a dam project in India where we had to resettle 40,000 families. Right. And so he was really intrigued by this idea that a company was going to put so much effort. Totally. So he agreed to work with us. So that was basically my mode of going about this work, which was like, let me find the best experts out there. And luckily BP, unlike other companies, was very open to engaging, to finding expertise, to bringing people in to help. So it was really a fascinating project.
So this sort of professional evolution actually seems in line with, even though the others were 1-year stints, let's say, the evolution has a recurring theme to it. And do you go directly from BP to Amazon?
No, I didn't.
What happens in between?
Right. So with BP, I left BP in 2008, and I left because by then, so I had spent a couple years in Indonesia, spent a year in China, spent a couple years in London working in BP headquarters. And when I was there, I started a part-time pro bono project supporting a United Nations mandate, an initiative to develop standards for businesses' responsibilities for human rights. Really interesting project led by an amazing Harvard professor named John Ruggie, who had a small team of people who were inspired by him and the work that he was doing. So I was supporting him part-time, and then left BP to join him full-time. So I did that until it was a time-limited mandate, so that ended in 2011. And then I spent a couple years teaching, consulting. But what had also happened by then was the Deepwater Horizon disaster happened in 2010. And when that happened, it was a real shock to me because I had just spent years at this company that I really loved. Like the work that I got to do there and the people who I worked with who really were curious and really wanted to get these things right and go beyond what was required by law anywhere to protect people and protect the environment. And then that disaster happened, and the BP that emerged in the aftermath of that was not progressive and enlightened and forward thinking, right? So I really started to question everything that I thought I had learned about business during my time at BP. And wonder, like, did I really learn anything at all? So I started talking to my peers doing CSR, human rights work in other companies where things had gone wrong. The Gap, Yahoo, Coca-Cola. And these were people who I'd met at conferences over the years, but I'd never really asked them, how do you feel about what we're doing here? You know, do you really feel like we're moving the needle? Are we just tweaking around the edges? How do you stay when things go wrong in your company when you're there? And those conversations, which started off as a kind of personal exploration, were what inspired me to then write my book, realizing that there is this global, invisible army of what I came to call corporate idealists buried deep inside these companies. These are not people doing PR, right? This is not work for the cameras. So that's what inspired me to write my book, which came out in 2014. That was the story that I really wanted to tell.
So the idea of the corporate idealist, which carries with it a certain connotation, and we can disagree about this, but corporate idealist to me almost has this after effect of, wouldn't that be nice? But it's not going to happen. And so how do those people who really care deeply, how do you make it happen? How is it no longer just some ideal, but an actual thing that happens?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the themes that emerged from, I did a few dozen interviews for my book. There were a couple of themes. I think a lot of people started off really idealistic, and they didn't lose their idealism wholesale, but they became much more pragmatic. And one word that kept emerging unprompted as a theme in a lot of my interviews was incrementalism. So embracing the small wins, and then people who had the endurance to stick it out over time could actually look back over the 5-10 years that they've been at a company and really see how far things had shifted.
Do you believe in this approach?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So now I'm not totally sure. I don't think I don't think it's fast enough. Like, I don't think change is happening fast enough or far enough. But I have also really come to appreciate how we all need to be in places that fit our skill set and our desires and the lives we want right now. And I want some of the smartest and best and brightest and most idealistic people to be doing some incremental work inside companies. I also want some of the smartest and best and brightest and most idealistic, energetic people to be trying to tear down the system, right? And those can also be the same people at different phases in their life, just as it has been with mine, right?
Yes. And we're going to get there, I promise. So, and is this a fair characterization, especially in the world of startups, growth stage companies, the idea of evolution versus revolution? And I tend to fall on the side of revolution, not evolution. It's just I get bored with evolution. But thank God there are people who don't. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
And I think you need both. Yes. There's almost a push-pull that is, and if I'm just going to carry the analogy out, like the evolutionaries are pushing, and the revolutionaries are just pulling, like, come on, let's go. We got to get there already. And I think it takes some of both to create real change.
Totally.
How do you end up at Amazon?
So the book came out in 2014. After that, I had a really fun year freelancing and speaking and writing and just seeing how the book landed. Like, I was pretty confident that it would resonate with people doing CSR jobs, right? What I didn't anticipate was how resonant it was with, first of all, with people in companies, but doing really different jobs, people working in HR or compliance or other roles where they are deep inside this huge machine, right? And trying to do their part, right? And so that was one audience. And I got invited in to speak to, the compliance department of a big pharmaceutical company, right? It was really interesting. But then also universities, like I spoke at a whole bunch of universities and still do, because students are really interested in, is this a real field? Like, can I actually go into a company without selling my soul? Like, what does purposeful work really look like? How can I have a kind of cause-oriented job, but with the resources of the private sector, right? People are really interested in this field and what life will be like. And then people working outside of companies, either trying to regulate them or trying to campaign against them, or partner with them, were really interested in the kind of insider's view. So I had a really fun year. But I got tired of the freelance hustle, and also realized that I was so passionate about speaking about this community because I am of it. So started to think, okay, well, maybe it's time to go back into a company again. But where could I possibly go? Like, I'm not going to go, work at Shell, right? I've kind of been there, done that with the extractives. And where could I go that would be early enough in its journey, shall we say, that I would still have to, use all these muscles that I've developed. Like, I didn't want to go work at Ben & Jerry's, right? Or Patagonia, as appealing as some aspects of that are, right? And also, be at a place where I like big organizations. Like, I like trying to figure out what makes them tick, and also they can impact at scale, right? So where could I possibly go that would be early in its journey, impact at scale, will have a range of issues? And then Amazon called. And I thought,
so
yeah.
Walk us through the phone call. How does that happen?
Yeah. So it's not exactly that they called. It was a friend of mine in our circle of CSR people pinged me and said, "Did you know that they're looking for somebody?" And I had known their head of sustainability, who was the hiring manager. I'd known her for years. So I talked to her, and that's how it happened.
So, how do you feel about the moves and changes they're making today?
I think they're good. I mean, where else can you go but forward in making big, bold commitments? Like, of course, that's what's needed.
No, they're unquestionably making big commitments and putting a lot of money behind their objectives. And I don't know if this is a true statement or not, but it could be close. The largest logistics manager distributor in the universe. Is it enough?
Yeah, so this is where we get back to your revolution versus evolution question, right? Because I think part of the big challenge with CSR is that not all, but a lot of CSR activities, programs, jobs are aimed at mitigating a company's impacts. Those impacts would not exist were it not for the company, right?
Which brings up the idea of carbon neutral.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is carbon neutral a thing?
Well, it's definitely a thing, whether you think it's like a legit thing. Like I always likened it to, does the Diet Coke cancel out my chocolate cake?
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
No, of course not. Like it'd be better if I didn't have the chocolate cake in the first place, but better that I'm drinking a Diet Coke than drinking a regular Coke. Right?
Okay. We could go on for a long time on this topic. So, one day you wake up and what happens, which eventually leads you to say, this is not the life I want.
Yeah. Well, the moment, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about the sort of fallacy of these light bulb moments, right? Because I did have a light bulb moment, which I'll share with you in a minute, but it's never just that moment, right? Like it's cumulative and it's gradual. But my light bulb moment was when I got home one day from work and my husband had quit his job in New York so that we could move to Seattle and I could take the job with Amazon. So he was home full time with our twins who were not quite 3 when I started the job in 2015. So we're talking like late 2016, early 2017. How old are they? They're 4.5 or something. So I get home from work. They're sitting on the couch reading with my husband, as they often were when I got home from work. But they were reading to him. And I was like, when did you learn how to read? So that was pretty much it, frankly.
You could just say it was the last straw.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had my kids when I was 40, right? I'm not having any more kids. So I will never have another 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old. And, part of what was hard then about realizing what that actually meant to me was that, my parents both worked really hard when I was growing up. Like most of our friends from Amherst are working parents. All of my friends from business school are working parents, right? And then it's like, isn't this the life that I'm supposed to have? Like everybody around me has it. So it took a while for me to give myself permission to quit and choose a different path.
Was there, as you are working through this process, is there a feeling in your gut or maybe throughout your entire body that you're just like physically, something is off? Or is it, and by the way, I believe that the mental and the physical are entirely connected.
For sure.
But is this more of a mental problem for you that you're trying to solve, or can you actually feel it in your body?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I totally agree with you that listening to your body is part of how you know what is going on, right? I mean, I think, it was a big job. It was a big, stressful job. So my physical, the pit in the stomach, the butterflies, whatever, which, I had, it was hard for me to parse out, like, was that just the challenges of the job, or was it, I'm not in the right job, right? Really hard to parse out. I mean,
that's hard.
It's hard. And so what I will say is that I had a really great coach, and I am a huge advocate of coaching, right? If you can afford it, or if you can get your organization to pay for it, or if you can find somebody who's training to be a coach, and so we'll do it pro bono. I can't speak highly enough of having a neutral third party who is skilled in not giving advice, but asking really powerful questions. So powerful. So when things were sort of not quite feeling right at Amazon, I didn't know if I was going to leave, but I knew that I was struggling. I engaged a coach that I had gotten to know some years prior, actually through a leadership development program that I'd done through BP. And so she was invaluable, right, in helping me see, because I was sort of flailing, I was sort of like, I suck, I'm going to get fired, this is terrible.
Which is a terrible feeling.
It's a terrible feeling. And she actually, just in asking and having me play back things that were happening, helped me see that, like, actually, I don't suck. Like, I'm probably not going to get fired soon. I have actually achieved a lot of what I set out to achieve. And now that I can see more clearly, let me try to make some more level-headed decisions.
So the decision, of course, is to leave. And you then co-found and co-write what you call The Life I Want.
Yeah.
Tell us about the life you want.
Right. So, after I quit, the spring after I quit, I was training for the Big Sur Marathon, and as one does, and like, I don't know, 2-3 months out, my left IT band was killing me. And I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to run. But I was Googling, like, how do you know when to stop training for a marathon? And all the running blogs were like, here's how you push through the pain and cross that finish line, right? And I was like, oh my God, like, I know I can't do this, right? But nobody's going to give me permission to quit but me. And so I stopped training. And then I realized that giving myself permission to quit the marathon was not unlike giving myself permission to quit Amazon, right? Because everybody's like, here's how you balance work life. Like, here's how you get through it. Like, get up at 4 a.m., pack your lunch the day before, never check your email before noon, only check your email 3 times a day, check your email for 10 minutes at a time. Like, none of those, right? Like, that's not it. So I realized all that, and then I wrote an essay about all that called The Year I Learned to Quit, which ran in the New York Times and got a lot of play, and an editor reached out and said, I hope you're planning to turn this into a book. And I had to say, oh, that's amazing. But, like, I quit. So I don't want to write another book right now, right? But thank you. Let's, stay in touch. And But I kept thinking about it, and all these conversations kept coming to me. And I was on a panel for our 25th Amherst reunion that Ron Lieber organized called, what was it? Winning by quitting, starting by losing, or something like that. It was a bunch of quitters and losers. So the topic was clearly on my mind, and I didn't really want to become an expert in quitting. But, you quit in order to let go that which does not serve, right? To move on to something that does. And so I was thinking about all this, and I reconnected with my friend Eva Dienel. And she and I got to know each other through these sustainability circles. And she had packed up her family in the Bay Area and quit her full-time communications job so that her family could move to Australia, where her husband is from, and he's a winemaker, to pursue their lifelong, dream of running their own family wine business. So she had reinvented her work life to enable the life that she wants. And she had just started a section on her blog called The Life I Want, where she was profiling other people who had done the same thing. So, cue the goosebumps. And we thought, can we pursue this project together, where it is a storytelling project of people who are trying to reimagine work so that it enables the lives we want rather than determining the lives we have.
So it kind of begs the question, have you defined the life you want, or are you just living?
I think it's a work in progress. Like, I think it keeps evolving. Like, just like we were talking before about how, the job that suits your skills and your temperament and your age and stage, that keeps changing. I think the lives that we want evolves the same way, right?
Let me try and ask the question a different way.
Sure.
Did you say, I want to live in Oregon, I want to be with my kids X hours a day, I want to write Y hours a day, I want to cook with my husband Z hours a day? Or did you say, I just want, it was a shitty question to start, sorry. Or was it, I'm not exactly sure what the life is that I want, but I know it's not this.
Great. Yeah. I get it. I think that what I am trying to do, what my husband and I are doing is, first of all, shedding the things that are like, I don't want that. Right. And then trying to listen really carefully. So I should also say that the process that I went through, which is not the same process that everybody would go through, was one of tremendous privilege. Like, my husband had already quit his job and was at home with our kids. I was able to quit my job and go completely quiet. Like, I had a bunch of freelance projects come to me, like somebody saying, hey, can you, help us do a human rights assessment of our supply chain? Can you help us write our sustainability report? And I was, again, in a position of privilege enough to be able to say, I could do that, but you know what? There are probably 100 people who could do that just as well. Let me give you their names. I carved out, the space for me to be able to be very precise. Like, what I am looking for is a level of precision in how I want to spend my time and my skills, and listen really carefully to what to follow next. And also try to voice these things as they occur to me, of like, you know what, I am not the best person to do your supply chain assessment, because I think what I'm really interested in right now is more strategic work. Because then those people would say, oh, okay, well, when we need that, we'll come back to you, right? So I do also believe that once you start articulating at least what you think you want or what you think you don't want, the right things start popping up. Yeah. So again, the kind of privilege and good fortune piece is that my husband has been able to do the same thing, right? And go quiet and try to figure out what excites him and what draws him. So we're here in Central Oregon because he also, as an ex-corporate person, has reinvented himself as a photographer and has really honed in on his appreciation of artisans practicing their craft. And so had done a bunch of one-day photo shoots of a jewelry maker, a ceramicist, a collage artist, right? And then had this idea to pitch a long-form year in the life photo project to a vineyard. And so pitched to somebody here, and that's why we're here. So I think it's trying to follow whatever the next right thing is. But for this,
I like that.
For this project, though, what Eva and I are really hell bent on ensuring is that it is not a project of privilege. Like, living the life you want can't just be for people who put in their corporate time and now have, a cushion, right? Because particularly now with the pandemic, fewer and fewer people have cushions, right? So how do you articulate those needs for yourself and carve out some space and reclaim the agency that we all have, right? But figure out how to exercise it so that you can just take whatever incremental steps would help you live the life you want. Does that make sense?
So it makes perfect sense. And you also use one of my favorite words, which is agency, right? And one of the things that I tend to talk about when I talk about Alto, actually, is agency, because there's a difference to us between saving and investing. And at least for me, saving is passive. Investing is an active process. And it requires that you take agency and ownership of what you want for yourself in the future. And before you came on, I asked you a question about retirement and like, when did you start thinking about it? And I don't know if you remember the answer, but you said it's no longer binary, right? There's not like work and then retire. For us, what we hope is the case for everyone in America is that ultimately they have the choice to decide what it is they do and do not want to do at any point in their life, right? But especially as we get to what historically has been thought of as the retirement years. But I have yet to meet a person who says retirement is at age 65 and it means that I sit outside on the porch and drink lemonade, right? I think that has been an evolution, not a revolution. I happen to think that's a good evolution. But the reason, this is a long-winded way of saying, to me, it's not so much, quote unquote, the life of privilege, which I don't think you're living a life of privilege. I think you're living a life of choice. And I think it's a really smart choice.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what part of my identity is service, like it has been for, I think part of my choices are figuring out how I can serve. And so if the life I build doesn't allow me to do that, then it's not the right life, right?
Well, first of all, I'm going to end by saying thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It was wonderful to see you and to hear the evolution of your life to date. And I think we got at the end, in part, the answer I was asking at the beginning, which is, who is Bader? And I think we got there. So thank you so much for doing this. It was a great pleasure to see you and speak with you again.
Thank you, Eric. You asked great questions, so I hope this is of service to your listeners.
Oh, no doubt it is.
A message from our sponsor, Alto IRA. Retirement in America is broken, and Alto revolutionizes retirement investing by providing access to investment opportunities beyond the public markets. It's online, automated, and simple. Plus, it's cost-effective. You don't have to be rich to invest in alternatives. Get started today at altoira.com.